Hello, and welcome to CRO Insights, How CROs Win, the podcast that uncovers the key markers of successful revenue leadership, brought to you by the CRO Collective in partnership with the Revenue Operations Alliance. In each episode, we'll explore the CRO career path, the major challenges facing CROs today, and discover strategies for building aligned revenue engines that scale your company's growth. All right, welcome to the CRO Insights podcast in partnership with the Revenue Alliance. I'm very excited to kick off this series in my partnership with the organization and the Chief Revenue Officer Summit they have. And my first guest of all the guests is Andrew Ettinger, who's the Chief Revenue Officer. I want to let Andrew introduce himself, but we had a great pre-session and we talked about a lot of really great things. And I think it could be a really interesting conversation to talk about what it's like to be a Chief Revenue Officer today. So Andrew, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. You threw me off my guard, telling me I'm number one. I don't even know how to reply to that. So thanks. It's great to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, same. So introduce yourself, would you mind? Give a little background on not only what you're currently doing, but how you got there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you could ask that to any CRO, and they could take the whole hour up. So I'll try to do this in like 3 minutes.
Sure.
Essentially, when I graduated college, I was a BDR, and I didn't know it, where they handed me a stack of printed out leads from a website and said, start calling people and convert them to trials. So it's sort of known as PLG today. And so I learned those skills in the trenches and wound up, advancing from there, thank God. And really have spent the last 20 to 25 years in cloud, data, AI, and infrastructure in the intersection of those technologies for enterprise customers in the B2B space. I've enjoyed being part of a bunch of great companies, taking one company public, raising a bunch of money in other startups with good exits, and it's been a really fun ride and privileged to have the opportunity to be in this great industry.
So, okay, appreciate that. I'm curious to know, though, your point of view on the Chief Revenue Officer role, right? Because we talked about this.
Yeah.
You know, I have a very specific sort of point of view on this. I'm curious what you think. You know, if you were to describe what a Chief Revenue Officer does to someone that never heard of one before, how would you define the role?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Let's reverse engineer the problem and start with what it's not.
Okay.
Okay. It is not a fancy title to give even a highly qualified VP of sales, right? So that they feel good because they have a title and they're going to play that role. At the end of the day, the Chief Revenue Officer should be a true operational partner to the CEO and founder of companies. The Chief Revenue Officer should have alignment, impact, and influence at the intersection of sales, marketing, success, product, and engineering, and really be the calming force to bring all of those teams together so that at the end of the day, everyone is in the boat, aligned at the same problems for the same ideal customer profiles against the same personas that you're seeking to engage to, and really make that entire operating system and connectivity work in unison in partnership with the CEO. That's really, at the end of the day, sort of how I see it, and I think largely aligns, kind of with how you see it. But that's what I believe the role is.
Yeah, no, it does. I couldn't have articulated it better myself. So I guess the question then is, why are so few CROs appointed that way? What's your opinion and what's your observation about why there are so many Chief Revenue Officers who run sales?
Yeah, we're getting spicy early on. I like it. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, again, I think it's dislocated on both sides, candidly, right? I think on one side, and there's nothing wrong with a great VP of sales. They're like actually still one of the most critical roles in companies.
Of course. Well,
right?
There's not to knock a head of sales. I'm just making the distinction between the two. That's all.
Correctly. And so when you're really good at that, and then you ask that person to go do something that they don't have experience at, or it's maybe not what they love to do, or they're not there, that kind of causes some stress and some problems in the system. And then on the other side, from the top down, if the company, and this is what you're so great at, isn't truly ready to embrace what a true and real CRO can do and bring, you get a lot of tension in the system. If you then over exaggerate that problem with growth targets that sometimes, right, I say that maybe tongue in cheek, are not always as realistic as expected, and you're not aligned in the capacity plan and the ramp plan and all of the real deep operational metrics that, spit out numbers that tell you kind of what you can get to or not, you cause a lot of stress in this system. Any of those can go wrong. And certainly when you have it all right and you have all that alignment, it can still go wrong because it's obviously a hard game. But I would say those are sort of the two, sort of forces that are pulling against each other in opposite directions in many cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My observation has been that the relationship between a chief revenue officer and the chief executive officer is the most critical relationship of the entire organization. And what I'm seeing is if the CEO and the CRO are not on the same page about these things, then that's when it usually doesn't work. And because of the role of a chief revenue officer, like the amount of impact that role has on the company, if that relationship is not adjusted or it's not foundationally really aligned, it creates disaster. Either what happens is most of the time is the CRO just gets replaced, usually for many reasons, which is why it is that so many chief revenue officers don't last more than like 16 or 17 months. I think this is about the time frame now. So I guess I would say then, as a chief revenue officer, and I assume someone who's played the role in the manner that you just defined it, how did that happen? Like, how was it that you found yourself in a situation where you were appointed correctly? What do you think was unique about your situation that had that work out that way?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of it comes down to the trust and cadence, right, with the CEO and your partner, right? And it's easier said than done, but I think when you can find that and when you can clearly articulate what you're going to achieve together, right? I mean, I think so many people put together their 30, 60, 90s that well, I guess now you could have ChatGPT go put them together, but like, let's say a year ago or 18 months ago, right? It was sort of just the very obvious things of what you would go do. But I think you really do need to align on what those core and critical things are and then over communicate with your business partner in those areas as you get into these things to start, right? And then maintain that operating cadence together and go through all that together and be really aligned. And if you're doing that, now you're, working from black and white, and you can change it and it can alter. And you can say you need to go focus more on sales right now or go more focus on demand gen or really help the engineering team understand why those features actually are going to be the ones that matter to our personas or not, or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But I think that's really it. And I got, fortunate with some fantastic CEOs that, we were very clearly and well aligned to on sort of what the core objectives were. And I also personally spent a lot of time working hard to understand marketing, to understand demand, and to really sharpen my skills from a technical perspective such that I could garner, right, the respect of sitting in a room with engineering leaders and drive that collaboration, right, which was not an easy thing and was not my core skill set, and had to work on over time, and happy that I did.
Yeah, well, that's great that you ended up in that situation, that you stumbled upon an organization and a leader who had the same vision and found you. In my view, that's kind of rare. Most of my situations I'm dealing with on a weekly basis are with trying to bring new thinking to the relationship of, frankly, the founder really is the pinnacle and critical person in the entire equation, right? Because if I meet a founder or CEO whom still is stubbornly views the CRO role as a head of sales role, until I make that person change that perspective and see the light of that, if I would be so bold, and make that change, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter how. Here's the thing: it doesn't matter how competent a chief revenue officer is that's capable of doing the job in the way that you described if their boss won't let them. And that's the problem, right? So, many times you go by a Ferrari and you don't know how to drive it, and you wonder why it's in the garage all the time because it's like this great thing, but, you're not utilizing it in any way that really takes full advantage of what that car can deliver. And I do see that if you take a person and you train them, I do this, as you know, I have a course. I train chief revenue officers to go to the marketplace, and I tell them, look, you know more about this now than most people do. You have a toolkit with which to start from day one, but now you got to go find the right job because if you find somebody who doesn't want that, but they want you to have that title, you're going to be battling this all the time. So that leads me to my second question, which is, how does aside from, aside from my course, right? How does someone prepare to be a chief revenue officer? I mean, it's a very complicated job. You've got all these competencies. You got to like run a lot of things, and you don't just magically wake up one day and sort of know how to do that. What's the way that you developed that? How did you become proficient at knowing how to manage all those complexities?
Yeah, look, to be very clear, I've also made plenty of mistakes, and I've also had situations where, despite even if I would have taken your course, I'm not sure things would have been perfect. And so,
Sure. They
like
won't
that's part
be.
of life.
That's right. It's
Yeah,
always a
and
precarious situation, no matter what. Yep.
yeah, and I think and I think you learn. I mean, look, I got some great advice. I don't know what it was 5 or 6 years ago, and that was that the modern CRO is going to be one that had to really be able to control their demand and understand marketing. So I don't know whether that advice was good or bad, but I took it and I listened and I started to learn how all of those systems worked. And several years before that, I just found myself in very technical evangelical sales to developers and then having to convince CIOs to get money because it turns out developers don't have any money.
Mm,
Right. And so I learned all of that and had very good mentors and very solid business partners there that I was lucky. And I was just a VP of sales then. And so, kind of morphing those things together and then certainly making mistakes along the way really just allows you to fine tune your edge there. So in summary, Warren, there's not like one thing and it's not an easy thing. And again, I have actually never cared about the title. I still don't. It's
sure.
just like functionally, I enjoy doing those activities.
Yep.
Right. And I enjoy doing all of that. And so if you do, and then you believe that that's what a CRO should be, you have to go find the ability to go earn right the right to talk about and leverage those skills. Your course, School of Hard Knocks, somewhere in between, good mentors, luck plays a role in
Yeah,
a bunch of
for
these things. There's
sure.
a multitude of ways in which you can get there. But for me,
Yep.
that was it. Like, there's no like one thing I could point to because it's still hard. And even when you nail it right, the market dynamics also then can throw a monkey wrench into all of this, right? In any unexpected right moment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think if I would say, I think that the thing that makes chief revenue officers sort of, like, I think we have that old adage, which is, salespeople are born, they're not created, right? There's some wisdom to that. I mean, certain people are just inherently better at it and they can build on that talent. But you could teach people to sell, right? No question about it. But there's some people that just sort of wake up in the morning and they just know how to do it. They have a certain type of persuasive personality. I would say that the chief revenue officers that I've seen that naturally gravitate towards this more complex definition of the role, they have a couple things. That one is they're sort of innately curious, like they want to know more about what's going on than just what they're doing. They don't just want to just run sales. They want to understand like how marketing works and how it impacts them. And they ask questions about marketing and they talk to marketers because they see that relationship and they have a proactive relationship to getting clear on that relationship and they do that. Or they're really great about customer success and they really like, I don't just sell and walk away. I'm not a, please them and leave them type person. When someone buys something, I want to make sure that they're happy and I keep the relationship going. Therefore, I'm probably going to have an interest in the customer experience and when they renew. And so, you find that the people that I find gravitate towards the role have that curiosity about how ancillary components of the business affect them, not just their sales role. That's one thing. Another one you said too is I think it's more systems level thinkers think more about the bigger picture. Like they look at the business like a bunch of parts, and they see those parts working together. And when they look at the business, they're not looking at it like how our sales process is, but how the sales process fits into the organization as a whole. And those people tend to gravitate towards the CRO role really well because that's the nature of them and they become good at this sort of thing. So I'm going to just sort of switch gears. I want to ask you a question about this one, which is when do you think a company should hire a CRO? Like what's the stage or time at which a company should consider bringing one on and why?
Yeah. Let's reverse engineer the problem to start when you definitely should not, right? And it's definitely sub product market fit, and definitely when the founder is still the only person kind of doing the sales, right? But look, I think the right time, is ideally when you believe you've achieved product market fit and you really do understand who your ICP is, who your core personas are, and you now need to figure out how to go implement, everything that we spoke about end to end. I really do believe that's the ideal time. Now, you can make a few exceptions and go a little bit earlier than that, provided, however, everything that we just spoke about is true. And you do have out on the table a mutual understanding that's like, look, we really are not at product market fit. We have a lot of very large signals, and there is an opportunity to mold this into something where we could go achieve that. So let's go work on that together, right? If you could get into that situation and it's pre-product market fit, but certainly post a few $1,000,000 or $10 million in sales, and you kind of proven this out more than 5 or 10 times, then you could make that case for it in the right circumstance. A little bit harder there, but those are sort of the lanes in which I would see it being most appropriate.
Okay, so let's say I'm going to kind of poke at that a little bit.
Okay.
So let's say, because I tend to agree, but I'm going to go deeper with it.
Okay.
Let's say a company gets to product market fit and they're at 5 million in revenues. Is it time for them to hire a chief revenue officer? Is it appropriate?
Well, now we should argue about what the definition of product market fit is, right?
Well, in the way that you were thinking about defining it in your answer.
Yeah. I mean, look, and it also depends on what your ASP is, right? Because if you're at $5 million and your ASP is hundreds of thousands of dollars, you probably have a couple outliers at large six figures. You probably haven't really proven that out more than 25 times or so, and you probably don't have many that have gone through a buying cycle, right? Expanded, upgraded, evangelized your product to a friend, refer, kind of all of that. So the summary is, if you asked me to answer that, I would say that seems too early.
Okay. Yeah, here's my thought, because I agree that, look, I think you and I would probably agree on this point that product market fit is somewhat of a always evolving thing.
Yeah.
There's probably a point at which all companies get to a point where they've really identified their customer, but that takes a long time. You're almost always sort of massaging that a bit. And it's more than just your persona. It's not just like the CFO of a company of this size. It's also buying habits and buying behaviors and the type of products that they buy and how much they're purchasing them for and how frequently they renew, and the price that they're willing to pay. There's all sorts of components to it. But that being said, I do believe that a big component of CRO success is bringing them in at the right time. And I see one of the pitfalls is when you bring a CRO in too soon, what happens. They end up running sales because there's nothing else for them to do. And that's because the company's too early, and growing the pipeline and growing the business is the focus of the business, because they're still experimenting with getting customers and getting enough data in the system to know if the product makes sense or not. And if I bring in a CRO during that stage, I'm naturally going to want that CRO to be very involved in the sales process, which will likely that person will end up being a sales leader by default. And then they never get out of that. They just stay there, And so I think that and it's not science here, but I've done this enough that, it's somewhere around 15 to 20 million or so in revenues, where not only have you established a decent amount of market fit, because you wouldn't be at those numbers if you didn't, but also there's enough what I call operational complexity in the business where a CRO is needed to align things that have become unaligned because of the complexity of the business. So, you've got a marketing channel that's off on its own, silos have been created, blah, 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 blah. That's where I think there's enough, let's say, traction for the tires of a chief revenue officer to grip the road and be able to act, have some, motion. Without those, I think they'll spin and they'll end up being thrown into the sales channel. What are your thoughts on that idea?
I totally agree. Said another way, at that stage, they've also had some churn, right? And so you've actually seen the full life cycle, so you can understand, right, how to your point earlier, run success as part of that as well. So I would agree wholeheartedly with you, which is why, again, that $5 million example is too early. There can be anomalies to all of this, right? Again, if they really want a partner, and you really are well aligned. But I would agree with you. I believe that is the sweet spot and makes a lot of sense and fully resonates with me.
Yeah. Okay, great. So What are some of the biggest like mistakes you've made as a CRO that you learn the most from? Like, what are some of the because you know, and I both know success is a lousy teacher, right? What are the things that you know? Boy, man, I know that was a bad thing, but it taught me so much.
Yeah, yeah. I think early on, it was a couple of things, and I think they're directly related. One was the expectation that every salesperson could ramp as quick as you ramped, right? And deliver the percent of exceeded quota, let alone hitting their quota that you could, right? Because you don't ever view yourself, at least the humble ones, as being that smart, just, kind of doing the right things and you can get there. So therefore, like it should be systematic is sort of the first thing. And then the second thing is really aligning the right profile of the reps against that, right, to execute that, right. And so, those two things combined were one big, mistake in learning that I
Hmm.
had. And then, the second one, which I fixed, and I kind of mentioned this, was really understanding how to go create demand on your own so that you could help your sellers with marketing and demand gen and kind of work on all of that. So I think that was another one, and then the third
So
one, and
was
then
the
I'll
mistake? I'm
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
That second one. I'm dig into that a bit. Was the mistake that you didn't create demand on your own, or that you did create demand on your own?
So it was, well, we created demand from our outbound on our own, but
Sure.
it wasn't creating demand from your traditional sort of marketing demand generation, taxes, content, all that
Yep.
other stuff, right? Like I wasn't as deeply involved there as I could have been, and realized, okay, look, like I think these things got to come together. They're very synergistic, et cetera.
I
Right.
got
And
it.
so
Yep.
again, that was the big learning,
Okay.
for me, for sure. And I think the third thing, right, which really will kill you, is that being convinced that you can do a few of these large outlier deals that aren't in your ICP and the organization can withstand it, right? Because they're XYZ brand name and it's, XYZ dollars, those can kill you. At some points, if the organization is really not ready and able to support that and sustain it, and still accomplish all of the other engineering tasks that they need to at the same time, it's tough. It's really tough. And so those are a couple of things.
Hmm.
I've, certainly made dozens of mistakes, including probably a minute ago or an hour ago or 2 hours ago,
Yeah.
part of
Sure.
the game. But these are sort of the big ones that stick out over time.
Hey, some of thank you for those. Some of the things I hear people say to me a lot is, I didn't do enough digging into the company's ability to support the role as much as I could have. I sort of
Ah,
just like I listened to what they said and I got seduced and I said yes. And then later on, I found out that there's a lot of things that had I dug in further, I would have seen that there were some red flags or issues with the way that things were being set up that were going to hamper my ability to succeed. And I could have done something about it if I knew to ask those questions, right? Um, Another one that I recall in my situation was, uh, like not listening to my own gut. Like I took a gig where the founder told me, the goal, the vision, or the mission of the company is to get this thing closed, sold in 3 years. Like when someone says that to you, it's like, you can sort of hear this sort of, we just want to cash out and of this thing as quickly as possible, which sets up an entire cadence and culture that's going to be pretty much just very fast paced and very short term. And strategy is probably not going to be very important to anybody. And you're not really going to get much done because they just want to get the hell out of this thing as quickly as possible. And they're going to do whatever they can to do that. And, if you're a chief revenue officer or really like strategic one in that environment, you can have a real hard time implementing anything that matters because they're going to say, "What are you talking about? We don't have the time for that. Just get some more deals closed." And I think that I put myself in a situation where I was like, "Oh God," I was on just a fast train to nowhere, and of course, it didn't work out. So okay, that's helpful.
and
So
I've
what?
had those. I
Yeah,
just took the lens of the operational role, right?
yeah,
And as you were saying that, I remember someone vividly saying, like, "Hey, man, it wasn't the blinking yellow light that like you sped through. It was red." Right.
yep.
And you knew it was red and you still went through it. So like it is what it is. So like to your point, right. So I've definitely done that. might be a glutton for punishment, but given that I'm in the cloud, data, AI, and infrastructure space, I gravitate towards complex problems. I just
Yeah.
like them.
Yeah.
And there are times that I've, certainly convinced myself, to your point, that things weren't as complex. And, then back to my other point, it becomes harder to scale, harder to get, the right folks, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I definitely made those mistakes. I just took a different lens to the answer.
Totally. I just made me think of something. You see, there's different types of companies, right? There's the SaaS businesses, which are subscription businesses, and then you got the PLG or the product-led companies that are, all driven by some dashboard-based software platform. Then you have more service-based businesses where you have long sales cycles and you're getting big clients and they take a lot of time. How do you see the CRO role being different in those environments? So, for example, just to give more specifics, how would you maybe make a distinction between the way a CRO would take root in a product-led company as opposed to a CRO who takes root in more of a service, long tail, services-led company?
Yeah, and I've done it in open source too, which adds another dimension to that as well. And so, it's definitely very different. So in like PLG or open source, no one wants to speak to a salesperson early in that journey, right? At all. And in fact, you'll screw it all up. And I don't care what company they're from or what pain they're on, right? They're there to go try the product and see where this is at. And so you have to really arm them with their persona and match them up. So if you're a data engineer, right, and they log into the product to use this, like they definitely, not all, but would definitely love to speak to another data engineer that would help guide them through that, as someone that would help them through that process, and making sure that you don't disrupt anything in that flow and wait until they get to that aha moment so that you can actually unleash sales is sort of one aspect, right, of that. And there's no free lunches here, right? It's not like just because you have PLG growth, all of a sudden your flywheel and pipeline goes faster, because many times people love to stay in that free tier and they don't want to go any further. And that's not
Yeah.
a bad thing. And so that's the other thing, is like you have to get people to understand, great, using open source is good. That's virality for our project. It's more users. It's more people solving problems here. The rising tide lifts all boat. Like that's okay. You're not going to win every one of those deals. You're not going to convert every developer to a team and do whatever that path is. And getting people to understand all that when they're like, wait, that's a lead. Wait, XYZ company just logged in. They're using this. Like, look at how big that could be. Like that's certainly one big aspect in the PLG motion. That tends to have some tension that you really need to get right.
Yeah. I see this as a really interesting sort of part of the job now because, a CRO at a SaaS company is a different type of job than a CRO that's selling. Like I have a couple of clients that sell very complicated sort of technology consulting business where they build these big, massive, infrastructure programs for clients that take years to build, and they require executive oversight, and you got to get probably like 8 people to agree to it. It's a big investment. It's a
Yeah.
much different motion than, to your point, if I'm selling software that someone can log into for free and use for
Yep.
8 months for no cost. And I think those are almost in a lot of ways different types of jobs, which leads me to a question, which is kind of an interesting scenario type thing. So let's say you're a CEO founder and you're looking for a chief revenue officer, and you interview someone who ran a sales team really successfully. And then you interview someone who ran a marketing team really successfully, and someone who ran a customer success team really successfully. Which of those 3 do you think would be more qualified to be a chief revenue officer?
Very good question. Very loaded, right? And look, I will stay true to my roots, right? And I do believe that at the end of the day, the revenue, right, ultimately will trump all. And look, there's no easy answer to that, and it's not that the marketing professional couldn't do it or that the success person couldn't do it either. But at the end of the day, as you scale that system out, right, being able to run and scale the actual sales side, right, and being able to forecast the right way and meet with the board and present, all of those things that you do secondhand by nature are really going to be important. And if those things get wrong, particularly a forecast, right, you're in a lot of trouble. And if you have a bias to say that that lane, right, has more experience, more scar tissue, right, and more ability to do that, I think you'll be better off. So,
Hmm.
very good question. That's where I would lean to.
Yeah, I understand. I'm seeing happen a lot. A lot of RevOps leaders are becoming CROs now.
Yeah.
They have this really interesting, centralized, data-driven perspective on the business, and they are almost by nature, by virtue of that job, they see the whole business. They see all the connective tissue, and so when they rise up to that role, they're already looking at things from a holistic and systemic perspective. The thing is that to have that combination of sort of the analytical and data driven brain, and also be a really good leader and sort of persuasive. It's hard to find someone who has both of those skills, but I've seen some, and they're really amazingly talented. Those
They
people.
are,
Yeah.
and I would love that persona in that role for sure, and pair
Yeah.
them with a very strong VP of sales, right? And you've got a fantastic combination, and really good for the VP of sales, right? Because he or she will then have a partner that's going to make their life a lot easier with those systems. So that, I mean, that would be fantastic. Uh, and I have seen a little bit of that. So and maybe it's just been watching or talking to you, watching some of your stuff, but that is a unicornish role,
It is
for sure. But maybe the whole CRO role in general is a unicorn
somewhat to some
role.
degree. I mean, I've met a couple of people who really have done it all, but most of the time, I think that the muscle memory of the marketplace, and you said it already, tends to lean towards sales leaders. They look at this role. I think there's both good and bad to that. As you probably already surmised, that you can sometimes end up hiring a sales leader to be a CRO, and sort of like it's almost like if I may say, it's like a insurance policy in sorts. Because if I hire a CRO who runs sales and it doesn't work out, I can always just have them run sales. So at least I'll get something out of this person, right? Whereas any other way, it's just harder to get that immediate value. It's a fallback option, and I don't think that's a good thing. But I see that happening a lot.
Or you have or you use the COO title, right, in that $15 to $20 million range, and everyone's like, well, what do they do? Run IT, like, you know what I mean? Manage the tickets or whatever, but that would be a real true COO role,
Yeah,
right? And something that would be very appropriate for the title. I've actually seen that also with that title, where those folks are a combination of all this, and they're very good.
yeah.
Right. And they play that role, and it's fantastic. So again, it's less about the title or, kind of what you call, it's more the function, right? And how do they perform all of that? So totally agree with you.
Great. Okay, great. So we're going to wind down, but I want to ask you a couple questions before we go. The first
Okay.
one is, if you, let's say you had a big exit and you get just like a lot of cash and you didn't really have to work again, what would you do?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Uh, I would definitely not be an operator, and I would definitely not be a CRO. So we
Mhm.
can start there. But I would stay very active in the advising game, and probably the small investing game. And not because I think I'd be good at investing or make any money from it, so I wouldn't risk like capital I couldn't like afford to lose. But I really just do genuinely enjoy the game. I enjoy generally helping entrepreneurs with great ideas succeed. I love technology. I love the intersection of building all of these companies. And so I would still stay very active, right, in some capacity as board members, advisors, right, and small, right, and investors, right. I love it, right. It's one of my passions, and so I would have a big void, without it in some capacity.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a hobby?
I guess that. I mean, look, I love my family. My kids are getting older. I play golf, but I can't play 100 times a week. So I probably need one. So I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, I need one too. I was thinking about this yesterday. I
But you
need
know what
one.
happens? You get old enough, you're secure enough to admit it, right?
Totally.
So I don't. That's why I would have to do some of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I love it.
All right, great. One last thing is to anyone listening to this podcast that wants to be a chief revenue officer, what are some key things you'd tell them that they should think about as they pursue the role?
I mean, start with your course, right? I mean, that's sort of the first and
Okay,
obvious one.
appreciate that.
But in all seriousness, like it does give you like good guardrails and a lot of things to think about. And if you're intellectually honest with yourselves, you can identify the areas that you need to shore up or that you should seek mentorship on, or try to kind of round your skill sets out. I think you said something very subtle but very powerful earlier. And I think if you do want to be a CRO and you have not been exposed to marketing or product or success or any of these other areas, right, you need to start going and sticking your nose in there, not in a bad way, but listening and under all the things that you said earlier, I think was very sound advice. And it was funny because as you said that, I was like, yeah, those are all the things I did. I think by accident. I certainly wasn't smart enough to think to go do that, right? I just sort of found myself in those situations. I think maybe more because I wanted market knowledge, but I think that would be the biggest thing, right? So that you can kind of go get all that exposure, and you might realize you love it, bringing all that together, and you also might realize you don't like it and you don't want to deal with that, which is okay as well. But now you kind of understand where you fit. And then you also understand, right, what you feel like you'd be stressed at going into that, because we're all going to be in any situation, regardless of what you've done. So I think that those would be the things.
Okay. Well, look, this is a great conversation, as I expected it would be. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for your insights. What are you up to these days? And are you looking for like anything in the marketplace? Can anybody reach out to you? And if so, what is it you're looking for from people?
Yeah, look, I'm around. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, please. I'd be happy to, and definitely looking to partner with any founders and CEOs in early stage companies that are, looking for a little bit of help in this area. Be happy to advise and happy to help. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Thanks for listening to the CRO Insights podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode.